Whoa, haircuts. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about an album I missed from last year. It's Tom Rogerson and Brian Eno with Finding Shore. This is an album from last year that snuck by me somehow. As many of you know, at least the ones who've been watching me for a while, I'm quite a big Brian Eno fan. I reviewed his The Ship album a while ago, did the in brief segments there. Not gonna bother with it here, because there's so much and I don't need to do that whole segment all over again, but you can check that video out. Now, I'll admit I've been a little wary about Eno's most recent releases. While I loved The Ship and felt it to be among the strongest and most creative releases he's had in a long time, I wasn't huge on his next solo album, Reflection. Ended up deciding that one wasn't video material. I liked the idea of Reflection on paper, like the whole generative music thing, which would basically make harmonies and rhythms at random alongside an app that would create variations of the music, endlessly varying on the time of day and the season. It's a really cool idea, but the actual album, it was basically just Neroli again, with more major key harmonies. I mean, it wasn't bad, but I didn't really get anything out of it that I couldn't out of other Eno albums, or have much of anything to say about it in general. I basically have just given you my review there. Between that and the similarly disappointing Lux from 2012, I started to get a little worried about new Eno releases despite his long back catalog of great material from the past. So because of that, as the end of last year started to get pretty tight, I ended up skipping this one for the time being. I was a little more hopeful for this album though, because, well, it wasn't just one track. And on top of that, it was a collaboration album. It's always cool to see Eno bounce ideas off of other people and come up with new stuff. I mean, I still haven't listened to all of his collaboration albums, honestly, because there are so many, but I haven't yet heard one I didn't care for. Now, this album is a collaboration with Tom Rogerson, who is part of an experimental rock band called Three Trapped Tigers. I'd never actually heard of the guy before this, honestly, but he is the first name in this collaboration, credited in the iTunes digital booklet for Notes, assuming he's responsible for the actual musical arrangement, while Eno is responsible for Sounds. So it's worth putting that out there. This is probably more of Tom Rogerson's things than it is Eno's, even if it does appear to be pretty out of the ordinary for Rogerson and not even close to as out of the ordinary for Eno. Which is why I'm primarily reviewing this album as though it were just kind of a regular Eno album, because it definitely sounds like one. But thankfully I actually quite enjoyed this one, much more than Reflection. And I found it in me to put forth the effort for an actual video this time too, even if not necessarily a super long one. Okay, so this album is primarily based around the piano and various manipulations thereof. When I first heard this album was going to be more piano-heavy, I thought, gee, never heard of a piano-heavy Eno album before. But they actually do push out of the typical Eno comfort zone with this. It's not like Plateau of Mirror, where it's just simple and atmospheric piano pieces the whole time. Well, there's definitely some of that on here. See Onness, Quoit Blue, Minor Rift, and the closer, Rest. But there's more to it than that. First of all, none of these tracks are just your typical repetitive rhythms. Well, some of them kind of are, but in general, it's kind of more free-flowing. It more often than reminds me of Niels Fromm, actually. I know he's really fresh in my mind since I just discovered him this month, but it's kinda closer to that than the typical Eno stuff. It's more improvisational, less structured, feels like it's got more going on in general. But on top of that, there is actually more instrumentation as well than just the piano. I mean, for instance, the first sound you hear in the album isn't actually piano at all, but rather this kind of Belle Celeste tapping on drinking glasses type of sound. I do really like these kinds of sounds. It quite frankly got me a lot more excited for what was to come, and the pianos on this track were a lot warmer and more emotional, and I was like, okay, this is actually a really good start. There are tracks where they use pianos to more interesting effect. On March Home, for instance, it sounded like the piano might have been used as more of as a percussive element or something. I'm not sure if that is what the percussion on that track actually is, but I feel like I've heard it before on other similar projects by other people. Like, Aphex Twin's Drux, for instance, has some very similar sounds on there. And Red Slip and Eastern Stack, primarily just interludes, but they're quite interesting experimental ones as well. Like, Eastern Stack has some really dissonant sounds, and Red Slip just straight manipulates the audio of the piano and glitches it up too. It's some nice touches, I will say that. But they also utilize synthesizers on this album too. The track Motion in Fields has these tight but subtle synth sequences that remind me of something in between Jean-Michel Jarre and early Oneohtrix Point Never, like his riff stays. Maybe a bit of, like, Boards of Canada, Tomorrow's Harvest in there as well. And you got stuff like Marsh Chorus, the longest track on here, which has quite a dramatic and vibrant, but also pleasant vibe to it, utilizing its synth tones as if they were just pianos. Or the Gabbard, which utilizes electric piano textures as well, which is really nice. That particular track is on the more repetitive side, admittedly, but it's a cool track. I was expecting this album to be more repetitive than it actually was, so that's cool. And there's Chain Home as well, where pianos and synths are combined with each other to create an increasingly darker and more dissonant vibe as it goes on, the synths getting particularly harsh near the end. The main thing I took away from this was that I was just very happy to get an Eno album that has some good solid variety to it. And it kept me interested the whole time. Now, I'm not going to act like this album is completely unlike anything I've ever heard before, or even if the way Rogerson and Eno went about making it was kind of different from the norm. The overall vibe was very similar to lots of other Eno releases in the past, and even the interesting techniques weren't exactly, invented here on the spot. This isn't an album so inventive that I feel like they were really pushing the limits of what could be done with ambient music and piano music and the like. And from an emotional standpoint, obviously there's no stinkers on here, but the album does run together a bit, falls in the background. Not every track's a standout. There are definitely some, the opener, Idea of Order at Kyson Point, Marsh Chorus, and Iken Loop, Chain Home, to name a couple. But even those I'm not precisely head over heels in love with. But I like how this album is out of the box from an Eno perspective. I didn't go into this album expecting something life-changing, and I didn't get that. All I wanted was for something that didn't sound like just another previous Eno release, and I got that. Rogerson and Eno did find ways to be inventive and interesting while making good music and sticking to something that isn't at all out of character for Eno. So I would say, even though I don't think this is necessarily something I would retroactively tack on to my 2017 year-end list, I can't think of anything I didn't enjoy out of it either, and I would definitely recommend checking this out to any Eno fans who haven't bothered with it yet already. So, yeah. I did really like this one. I'm overall feeling a 7.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.